For decades, Melinda Gates existed in the shadow of one of the world's most influential power couples. As co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she was synonymous with global philanthropy, charitable work, and shared purpose. Her life seemed scripted for public consumption. Calculated appearances at international conferences, carefully curated interviews about their foundation's work, and a public image of marital stability that defined modern power partnerships. Yet behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. After more than 2 decades of marriage, Melinda French Gates made the difficult decision to step away from the partnership that had defined her adult life. In doing so, she embarked on a profound personal journey that would eventually lead her to break her silence about what comes next, including her new relationship with a man far removed from the world of billionaires and global influence. This is the story of how Melinda Gates redefined herself, rebuilt her life, and found unexpected happiness in simplicity. Melinda Gates' story begins in the late 1980s at Microsoft, where she worked as a talented product manager. She was intelligent, disciplined, and ambitious, a woman who had carved out a successful career in the male-dominated tech industry. Her background emphasized achievement and excellence, and she brought that same work ethic to everything she pursued. Bill Gates, already a titan of the technology world, noticed her. What followed was a courtship that would reshape both of their lives. Unlike many power couples, their relationship did not ignite instantly. Melinda was not particularly impressed by wealth or status. She was focused on her career and personal growth. Bill, however, was persistent. Over time, their connection deepened, and what began as reluctant interest transformed into genuine partnership. They married in 1994, deliberately keeping their wedding private and away from media scrutiny, a decision that reflected Bill's preference for privacy and control, even in matters of the heart. The early years of their marriage were marked by the creation of something unprecedented, a charitable foundation that would eventually reshape global health, education, and development. Starting with modest ambitions compared to their eventual scope, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grew into one of the world's most influential philanthropic institutions. Melinda was not a passive participant in this endeavor. She was deeply involved in decision-making, championed causes related to women's health and children's welfare, and brought her own vision to the foundation's work. To the outside world, they appeared to be the ultimate partnership, two brilliant minds working in harmony toward the greater good. Their wealth was immense, their influence undeniable, and their public image carefully managed. Yet even as they built this empire together, cracks were forming beneath the surface. The public facade of the Gates marriage masked increasingly serious problems. One of the most significant issues centered on Bill's association with Jeffrey Epstein. Reports indicate that Gates and Epstein met around 2011, years after Epstein's criminal conviction. The connection was reportedly framed as professional, discussions about philanthropy, global health initiatives, and charitable funding. However, for Melinda, this association became deeply troubling. She viewed Epstein as a dangerous individual and was deeply uncomfortable with Bill's continued contact with him. She expressed her concerns forcefully, believing that such connections posed both a personal and reputational risk. This issue became a source of significant marital tension, representing not just a disagreement, but a fundamental difference in judgment and values. Beyond the Epstein connection, there were other strains on the marriage. Reports suggest that Bill engaged in a long-term extramarital affair with a Microsoft employee, beginning around 2000 and continuing for years. When this eventually became public knowledge, it delivered a devastating blow to Melinda's trust and emotional security. The combination of these revelations, the inappropriate associations, the infidelity, the judgment lapses, created a pattern of betrayal that eroded the foundation of their partnership. Melinda found herself managing not just the emotional fallout of these discoveries, but also the cognitive dissonance of maintaining a public image of marital harmony while privately experiencing profound hurt and disappointment. She developed anxiety and suffered panic attacks as the weight of the situation bore down on her. The woman who had built a career on competence and control found herself in a situation where neither skill could restore what was broken. After more than 25 years of marriage, Melinda Gates reached her breaking point. The accumulated weight of betrayals, the erosion of trust, and the emotional toll of maintaining a false public persona became unbearable. In May 2021, Bill and Melinda Gates announced their separation through a carefully worded public statement that provided little detail about the reasons behind their decision. The announcement was formal and controlled, characteristic of how they had always managed their public image. However, the reality behind those words was far more emotionally complex. The divorce represented the end of not just a marriage but an entire shared life, decades of partnership, common goals, and intertwined identities. For Melinda, this meant confronting questions about who she was beyond her role as Bill Gates' wife and co-founder of their foundation. The decision to separate was not made impulsively. It represented the culmination of years of emotional distance, broken trust, and the realization that the relationship could not be repaired. Melinda had spent years trying to manage the problems, to work through them, to maintain stability for their 3 children. But at a certain point, she recognized that continuing in the marriage was not an act of strength or commitment. It was self-abandonment. The divorce process itself was reportedly handled through a separation agreement rather than through contested litigation, suggesting a desire to minimize public spectacle and move forward with as much dignity as possible. However, the financial and asset divisions were extraordinarily complex, given the scale of their wealth. While the exact details have remained largely private, reports indicated they owned approximately 270,000 acres of farmland across the United States, along with numerous other assets. The question of how these holdings will be divided added another layer of complexity to their separation. Following the announcement of her divorce, Melinda Gates entered what she has described as a difficult and necessary emotional recovery process. She was, in effect, rebuilding her identity from the ground up. For nearly 3 decades, she had been defined by her marriage, her role at the foundation, and her position as one of the world's most influential women. Now, she had to ask herself fundamental questions. Who am I outside of that context? What do I value? What kind of life do I want to create for myself? These were not easy questions, and the answers did not come quickly. She has spoken openly about the complexity of healing, acknowledging that moving past such a profound rupture requires time, patience, and genuine emotional work. One of the most significant decisions Melinda made during this period was to step away from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This was not a decision made lightly. The foundation had been the central focus of her professional life for decades. It was her legacy, her contribution to global good, her life's work beyond motherhood. Leaving it represented a symbolic break from her shared identity with Bill. However, it also represented an opportunity for liberation. She would no longer be tied to his vision, his priorities, or his shadow. Instead, she would create something entirely her own. This decision marked a turning point in her emotional recovery. Rather than remaining in a shared structure that would require constant negotiation and interaction, she chose independence. She chose to define her own purpose and pursue her own priorities. With her separation from the foundation, Melinda launched her own philanthropic initiative, the Melinda French Gates Foundation. This new organization represents her values, her vision, and her priorities as an independent thinker and leader. The focus is decidedly different from the work she did with Bill. She emphasizes women's rights, gender equality, and family support systems. Rather than approaching philanthropy from a purely scientific or technocratic perspective, her work is rooted in the recognition that sustainable change requires attention to the specific needs and agency of the communities being served. She has invested significant personal resources in these initiatives, dedicating time not just to funding but to direct engagement with the people and organizations doing the work. Melinda's approach to philanthropy reflects a shift in perspective from her earlier work. She believes that real impact comes from listening to communities, understanding their own analysis of their problems, and supporting solutions that emerge from within those communities rather than imposing external solutions. This hands-on approach has taken her to communities around the world, where she meets directly with women, listens to their stories, and works to understand the systemic barriers they face. She has become an advocate not just for funding but for equity, recognizing that true change requires addressing power imbalances and structural inequalities. Her work focuses on education, healthcare access, economic opportunity, and political participation for women and girls. In many ways, her independent foundation represents the evolution of her thinking, matured by experience, informed by direct engagement, and grounded in a commitment to putting agency in the hands of those most affected by the issues she addresses. As Melinda moved through her emotional recovery, she has spoken about achieving a greater sense of emotional stability and peace. She has described the hardest parts of healing as being behind her, though she acknowledges that growth is an ongoing process. She has moved from a state of acute emotional distress, characterized by anxiety and the fresh pain of betrayal, to a calmer, more grounded place. This transformation did not happen overnight. It required therapy, reflection, time with trusted friends and family, and a deliberate commitment to moving forward rather than dwelling in the past. She has been open about the fact that this is not a dramatic or instantaneous recovery, but rather a gradual process of rebuilding trust, first in herself, and eventually in the possibility of new relationships. This emotional trajectory has positioned Melinda to consider her personal future in new ways. She has spoken about being open to new relationships, but not desperately seeking them. Instead, she approaches this new chapter with intentionality and self-awareness. She has made clear that any future partnership would look different from her marriage to Bill. It would be based on more equal footing, would not be enmeshed with shared business interests, and would allow her to maintain her independence and autonomy. This shift in approach reflects her hard-won wisdom about what truly matters in intimate relationships: mutual respect, honest communication, shared values, and the preservation of individual identity within partnership. After several years of focusing on her own healing and rebuilding, Melinda has begun a new relationship with a man who represents a stark contrast to her life with